Welcome to the Western Baul podcast series, with talks on traditional spiritual teaching and its application in the world today. The intention of the series is to offer something useful for those who are drawn to study themselves and engage practice on the spiritual path. New talks are posted by the first of each month. The content of the talks is for informational purposes only, and not to provide any kind of counseling, medical, or professional advice. This podcast is titled, Dig into the Mud to Get to the Sky. The talk was given by Karuna Fedorschak on January 11th, 2020 in Prescott, Arizona. Karuna was a singer in the musical duo Small Change, which performed Western Baul music. She authored Parenting, a Sacred Task, and was one of the editors of Sahaja magazine on Western Baul practice. Until she became a mother, she was a member of LGB, which was the first band to perform Western Baul music. Karuna Fedorschak.
So dig into the mud to get to the sky. It just popped into my head that earlier in my life when I was in college, my aim was to be an archaeologist. So I did a lot of digging. I didn't even think about the fact that I connected with this phrase. I didn't connect that with my training as an archaeologist. So digging into the mud to get to the sky. This phrase is poetic and it's metaphorical. And it's also an exactly practical piece of guidance on the path. So I want to talk about the phrase. I want to talk about the mud, and I want to talk about the sky, and what that means to me. And then I'm going to kind of take us on a little tour through some related ideas and teachings, including how we could begin to dig in the mud if we're interested. And some of you here are already engaged in that, but it never hurts to go over the basics. And then I want to I'll end with playing you a song, which this phrase, dig into the mud to get to the sky, is actually the refrain of a song. I didn't add any kind of a subtitle to this because I think everybody gets the gist of this. It describes something we could call a counterintuitive, maybe even unnatural journey into the mud or downward in order to facilitate access to the sky, that which is above, beyond, greater, upward. Like it's kind of counterintuitive to go down to get up. That's the metaphor. So what is the mud? I was thinking that on a practical, obvious way, it really is just the stuff of our lives. Like the mud is just what we're dealing with in our life every day. Our job, our families, our finances, car repairs, just the ordinary stuff. Relationships, of course. This family covers that. But then on a deeper level, and I want to dig deeper, we could say that it's everything that we don't know or don't want to see about ourselves. And there's a lot of that. Some of that we don't know, but some of it we do know, but we don't want to see it. You know what I mean? It shows itself, and we quickly try to, I'll speak for myself, it shows itself, and I quickly try to pretend it didn't happen and kind of sweep it under the rug. Because it doesn't fit. The reason I do that is because it doesn't fit with the self-image that I've built of myself. I'm not a person that does that uses that tone of voice, or behaves that way, or did that thing. Everything we don't know or want to see about ourselves is obviously influenced by societal norms, by the families we grew up in, by the religion that we may have grown up in and still, subscribe to, but also by ego and self-image, as I mentioned already. So those things are all influence what it is that we don't know or don't want to know about ourselves. So, that's like things like at one end of the spectrum, just destructive impulses, difficult emotions and situations, the nitty-gritty of life. But the fact is that we can only really start where we are. If we attempt to kind of leapfrog over this level of things, what we could call the nitty-gritty or the mud, it's going to, if you've tried to do that, it's going to kind of backfire. It's going to boomerang around you. You are going to have to deal with sooner or later whatever it was that you didn't want to deal with. And that principle holds true even in some very simple ways. We've probably seen, like as a parent, I remember if you try to avoid disciplining your kid, the problem typically just gets bigger. So it's like, I don't want to be the bad guy, and then I've got an even bigger problem on my hands because I've got a kid out of control that needs a boundary. So it's like that's a very ordinary kind of example of this principle that if we don't deal with what it is that we don't see, and we attempt to say in this domain of the spiritual path or study of the traditions and the teaching, if we attempt to just engage those in a mental way. I mean, obviously, our mind is part of the process, and again, we have to start where we are. But if we just do that and don't really take them to heart, it's going. We're not going to make much progress. Let's put it that way, in my opinion. So there's fertile ground for growth in the mud of life. I mean, think about mud. Mud is thick and usually dark and wet, so it is, it's a fertile medium for growth. But it can be really sticky too, like really sticky. I guess quicksand is just mud. So, our explorations should be undertaken with some caution and ideally, I believe, with some guidance. And whether we're talking about it just on a psychological level or whether we're talking about it psychology and spirituality, guidance is pretty helpful for the sticky mud. And then, so there's mud and then there's the sky. For me, the sky is freedom, like real freedom, and innocence, self-knowledge, reality with a capital R, having a relationship to something that's bigger than our own kind of bubble, a relationship with a larger reality. Space, higher ground, even just a broader view. I still do somewhere. I have a book that's something like 15-minute meditations for, I forget what, but one of them is just to remember to look at the sky. It's so simple. I don't often remember it, but it does definitely change one's perspective. To remember to look up to the firmament. You say the sky is everyone and everything that's beyond ourselves, this idea of the kind of bubble that we're all in. And rightly so. I mean, it's not like there's anything wrong with that or abnormal about it. We could say the sky is, there's this idea, and I want to talk about a little bit about Carl Jung tonight. There's this idea of integration that he talked about, integrating all this material, all this mud that we don't identify with, and integrating that with the conscious self. So the idea of integrating ourselves with a broader reality, or with our conscious reality. So those were some ideas I had about the sky. I wanted to talk about Carl Jung because I just immediately thought of him and his work. Does everyone know who he is? He was a Swiss psychiatrist, very influential. He started off as I don't know if he was a student of Freud, was he? He was a student of Freud, and then they were colleagues, and then they had an ideological break at a certain point. Jung's pretty fascinating. He believed in doing the work that he was asking of the people he had in analysis with him. He believed in having done that work himself before he would ask that of anyone else. So he really explored this whole idea of the underworld and going down, kind of descending for healing, healing in the descent. So the dark side of life, the underworld, we could say, personal and archetypal, is a doorway, holds the keys to real change or transformation. Difficult situations, as we touched on already, they have great potential for real learning. I mean, I think most of us instinctively push those away and avoid them because they're difficult. I would rather life be pleasant. But the fact is that actually some of the most difficult situations I've been in have been the most edifying, shall we say, in a real way. So there's this idea of allowing the full spectrum of life and feelings, the dark and the light, the creative and the destructive, which doesn't mean you let yourself go on a rampage and, an angry rampage and do damage, but to accept those things. And I don't mean to be glib about it, because I don't think that journey is one that's happens overnight, but it's definitely a journey worth going on. There's this great quote, I meant to bring it with me, that I've been revisiting a lot in the last year or so, and it's from Trungpa. It's called All-Encompassing Friendship, and that's the translation of a Sanskrit word, Maitri. And it's just a couple of paragraphs in a book of quotes from him. In there, he talks about how if you're really friends with someone, you don't pick and choose the qualities that you're engaging with your friend. It would be nice if you could, but most of us, we do this just unconsciously. I like being friends with this part of you, but if you show me this part, I don't like it so much. And it's okay if you don't like it so much, but the fact is that all-encompassing friendship is relationship to the whole of another person. So if that's a friendship that encompasses the creative and destructive aspects of the other person and, of course, of yourself. I love that, and I've just gotten a lot of mileage out of that. It speaks to me because inevitably, if we become close with anyone, there are always those aspects to a relationship on both sides, and if we're just not going to be able to pretend that's not there. Or, maybe that's the reason for people's serial marriages and divorces, or the fact that people don't marry so much these days. I don't know. I'm not a sociologist, but again, it seems like a worthwhile consideration how we can have all-encompassing friendship, whether that's with a romantic partner or a friend or a child. So creative and destructive aspects. Whatever is buried as undesirable for us, whatever's in our shadow, the shadow, I'm going to read you I have to read you a definition of the shadow. Most people, I think, are probably familiar with the idea. But anyway, whatever's buried as undesirable also carries life force and creativity with it. And so we've buried this undesirable thing, but we've also, not uncommonly, also buried some creativity and life force along with it. So it's kind of like the price we pay, for picking and choosing with ourselves, what it is we like and what we don't like. And it's not like that process is so conscious. So again, I don't mean to be glib, but so the shadow, here's a definition: an unconscious aspect of the personality which the conscious ego does not identify in itself, or the entirety of the unconscious, everything of which a person is not fully conscious. In short, the shadow is the unknown side. A few years back, I did a training called Landmark Education. Has anyone heard that? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and has anyone done that training? Well, one of the things that they sort of famously do is they draw this big circle, and they talk about, they make a little slice of it, and they go here's what you know. And then here, and then there's other stuff you don't know. I don't know how to fly a plane. That's in another slice of the pie of what I know I don't know. And then most of the pie is what I don't know. Oh, I didn't finish reading a little bit more about the shadow. Because one tends to reject or remain ignorant of the least desirable aspects of one's personality, the shadow is largely negative. There are, however, positive aspects that may also remain hidden in one's shadow. So again, back to that idea of kind of the price that we pay for burying anything. And then I mentioned already Jung's idea of integration or assimilation of the shadow. So he saw that as being a pretty big piece of work that could be done to bring that material kind of into conscious awareness. He was not really I guess he was scientific, but he was more interested in stories and visions and dreams and like that. He was a pretty remarkable individual, definitely worth studying if you have not done so. The man who was my teacher, Lee Loswick, and I think we probably have some books of his out on the table, and I hope we have this one. If we don't have it out, we do have copies of it. It's called Feast or Famine, Teachings on Mind and Emotions. And I'll be sharing some material from that later. But what I was going to say right here was just that he really specialized in making this connection from the mundane to the sublime. It was his preference always to start at what he called like the dog shit level. I mean, he was forever turning us back, those of us who were his students, turning our attention back to that. You know, not because a more elevated view or other kinds of experiences aren't valid or useful, but that, again, this idea that if you try to skip over that stuff, you're going to step in it. You know? So, and he really had a great way of, in my experience, of going from that level of things and taking it to the sublime. You know, when he would speak to us or when he would engage considerations with us, like, you know, he like on this, you know, practical level. You know, he was interested in how we kept our spaces. Like, how's your living space, he might ask. If you came to him with some other question, what does it look like, you know? And, you know, what tone of voice do you use with your partner or your child or your friend? He came up with the use of the game of bridge for self-observation. It's just an awesome arena for that, but it's just this ordinary game of bridge. But it just so happens for anybody that's ever played bridge that there's all these ways to win and lose in bridge. It's like, it's a really interesting game that, you know, once he learned it, he was just completely taken with its appropriateness to be used in this way, to self-observe. So just this ordinary game. And the fact is that games in general, as some of us have been noticing, can be highly revealing of our orientation toward life, you know? Like how seriously we take them. Some of us were playing a game of Scrabble, 4 of us, a few weeks back over the holidays. And the one friend she started off like just kind of jokingly saying, every time it came around to her turn, saying, "You took my spot. Oh, you just took my spot," you know? But she became increasingly agitated, and then she finally dropped out of the game very easily. We get down to how it is we operate, even just when playing a game, you know, where honestly nothing's really at stake, you know, nothing vital. Also, my teacher, Lee Loswick, had a form of enquiry that he recommended, which you may have heard mentioned here before. And his form of enquiry kind of riffed on the classic enquiry of Ramana Maharshi, which is, who am I? You may have heard of that. It's classic enquiry that you ask yourself. His form of that was, who am I kidding? Funny, you know, and pithy, but also very multi-layered. There's a lot to dig into there. Speaking of digging. So this idea of going from the mundane level to the sublime was really, like I said, was something I really appreciated in my teacher and saw him able to do. And that meant that, you know, in interacting with him in ordinary life, it's like he could just use almost anything that came up to make a point or to, you know, or a teaching lesson or to help you see, you know, a bigger view. So he typically deflated grandiose ideas and approaches in favor of a more practical level. Again, not because there aren't other levels of reality, but just that was like a good place to start and to stay until you're done, you know. There's a book that I've been reading this week. It's called Training the Mind and Cultivating Loving Kindness. It's a commentary by Chogyam Trungpa, the Buddhist teacher, if any of you have heard of him. It's a commentary on the Abhidharma, which is, Abhidharma is to say it really simply, is Buddhist psychology. I guess the original texts of Abhidharma are like, there's a lot of very precise charts and lists. Someone described Abhidharma as comparable to a periodic table of experience. I actually printed you out the chart. You can pass this around. Like stuff like this. If you've read much Buddhist literature, you know that they have 5 kinds of this and 7 ones of that and 8 ones of these things. And so Abhidharma is full of these, this many traps over here, and this many ways to taint the mind, this ways to fail at meditation and whatever in this domain of Abhidharma. So that's what this book is about. But something that I wanted to talk about from this is just a point, a practice that I found useful lately. But in here he talks about that in Buddhism there are the three vehicles are Hinayana, Mahayana, and Vajrayana. Those are 3 kind of levels of practice and 3 different categories of teaching. And he says that in the Hinayana, which is where you start, that's where you tame the mind. And in the Mahayana, you train the mind. So this is a book on training the mind. So all the chapter headings in here are slogans from the Abhidharma. And the one that I am interested in is drive all blames into one. The idea behind this is that you take blame. So the one that you drive all the blames into is yourself. Yes. And for me, that is exactly the opposite of the usual flow of blame in my life, which is that I am always looking to. I just reflexively am seeking to blame others. I mean, I don't even examine that typically. And what I see about that is that what we do is we project our suffering outward. We're always looking to put that on somebody else. And if you've ever watched, a couple people that arguing, you can see that that's happening. You're kind of that's just that person's, they just had that hurt, and they're making it about this other person. It's not you never have to work things out with people. But really a lot of it is that we're reflexively looking to deflect blame. And a piece of that I see is that we're trying to avoid experiencing our own suffering, and we want to blame somebody else for that. But it is possible to take blame. It's actually, you can actually decide to do that. And I recently have had a couple of experiences of doing that, and it was amazing the way it changed. It can change a situation to simply take some blame. To be the first to take some blame. It's in my mind, I'm always certain that it's the other person that needs to take the blame, make the apology, whatever it is. But the fact is that maybe sometimes somebody will, and probably they have, but usually they don't. So it's if I can, then I should do that. So here's some quotes from Trungpa about this slogan of drive all blames into one. From Training the Mind. He has other books on Abhidharma, so if you're interested in Abhidharma, you can look him up. There's one called Glimpses of Abhidharma by Trungpa. For instance, you could drive all blames into Joe Schmidt, but instead you drive all blames into yourself. In this case, you see the possibility that aggression and neurosis is expanded if you drive your neurosis into someone else. So instead, you drive your blames into yourself, onto yourself. That's the basic point. So it's like we actually increase the suffering if we attempt to deflect it. So if we can just take a little bit, it doesn't even have to be the whole thing, but just let a little bit of it come back on you. I think that it can greatly relieve the suffering in a situation. So a couple more things on that. And if you do not really absorb all the blame, but say it's not yours since you're too good and are doing so well, this is exactly what I tell myself, then nothing is going to work. This is so because everyone is looking for someone to blame, and they would like to blame you. And then this is so great. Once you begin to do that, drive all blames into one. It's the highest and most powerful logic, the most powerful incantation you can make. You can actually make the whole thing functional. You can absorb the poison, then the rest of the situation becomes medicine. If nobody is willing to absorb the blame, it becomes a big, interrelational football. It's not even tight like a good football, but filled with a lot of glue and gooey all over the outside. Everybody tries to pass it on to each other and nothing happens. Finally, the football grows bigger and bigger and bigger. Then it causes revolutions and all the rest. So drive all blames into one.
Wouldn't that be the same as just taking personal responsibility?
For everything. For everything.
Yeah. If I say this is on me, it ends it, and it's cleaner.
Absolutely. It really seems like it immediately makes an opening for everybody. Like, I love the way he talks about you absorb the poison and the rest of the situation becomes medicine. Because it does feel like, most of the time for me, the idea of accepting any blame in a situation feels like that. Like, I'm going to just fight tooth and nail because that feels like I'm just being done to in a way that I'm determined not to be. I'm going to come out swinging. But if I can accept a little bit of that, even if somebody looking objectively was like, that wasn't really your fault, it kind of doesn't matter, And it goes back to this idea that whoever can do it should do it, So, and that's not everybody in any given situation, Sometimes you just know that whoever you're interacting with has a particular wound in a certain domain, especially if you know them very well. And it's like the expectation that they're gonna, in a moment, turn that on a dime is like, that's just not reasonable. That's just not compassionate, Like I said, I kind of had an experience of it, and I didn't really have the words for it. And then I came across that slogan. I was like, that's what it is. Try to flames into one. Let's see.
Karuna, is that an example of finding something in yourself that maybe you didn't know was there until you were able to do that? Turn around.
Yeah, I think so.
Reactivity is it's a protective reflex.
Yes.
So it's a very inbred, very deeply seated thing that we need to train ourselves to be able to do that. And do that sincerely, it seems to me.
That's right. Yeah, that's like, oh, I could do that. I actually have a choice about that. I could actually do that. And when, in a couple of instances I'm thinking of when I did that, it completely changed the situation. Like, it just made something opened up that wasn't there moments before, You know how it is when you're in it with somebody or in a situation, and it's like that Chinese puzzle thing. It's just tighter and tighter and tighter, So somehow this just this idea of accepting some blame is just like a breath of fresh air. Suddenly there's more room for everybody.
Well, does that preclude standing up for yourself?
No, I don't think so. I actually think that I think you can't accept blame if you can't stand up for yourself. Does that make sense? Yeah. You had a thought?
Maybe there's certain times where you can't accept the blame because there's a wrongdoing that you can't do that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to guess that there aren't any hard and fast rules, and
Right.
I have to say I'm pretty sure it probably doesn't preclude standing up for yourself. But what if one could stand up for oneself without being aggressive and blaming of the other?
Right.
What
Even
about
though
that?
you don't take it on yourself.
Yeah.
As you're speaking, I'm thinking that taking blame in a situation where, you don't want to, I wouldn't want to take blame for something that I'm not responsible for, or be a doormat or something. But I could take the blame for, like, my reactivity. Like, so what am I so reactive about?
That's right.
Who am I kidding? I mean,
Yeah, exactly. And that was, I found myself willing to take responsibility for at least what I could see was my part, Yes.
Does blame come from the ego? Is that what?
I think it's a defense mechanism of the ego,
For the ego?
Yeah, because I think that somewhere it's like if we admit any wrongdoing, it's like some kind of a little death, to to ego, which is in charge of survival, the survival of us on all levels, you know. Mm-hmm. Let's see. So I also wanted to talk about this other book by Lee Lozowick called Feast or Famine. He also talks in here about taming and training the mind in a little bit different way. He says that we tame the mind through self-observation, meditation, and koans. He mentions one that he created called Draw No Conclusions Mind, but also another koan or slogan would be Drive All Blames into One. And also instruction as to why it's a good idea to be tamed. So study, you know, he says you really have to, actually the mind can become enrolled in the idea of that it's a good idea to be tamed, you know. And that's the only way it actually happens, is that the mind has to get on board with that, you know. He says in the book that he's often asked to define mind or ego. He came up with something which is, well, useful to consider. He says that mind is the quality or characteristic of being that actually creates and sustains the illusion of identification. That's just something to chew on. Another thing he says that I have, when I heard him, because I heard him say that before I read it in this book, and I kind of never have forgotten it. He says that one clear sign of a lack of management of the mind is over-talking. That seems like another really good, basic
clarification.
Clue. Over-talking is my phrase. He said, talking too much is a clear sign of a lack of management of the mind. He said that practice and remembrance wears down the mind, and that mind is a forgetting machine when it comes to practice, like spiritual practice, like anything that's going to basically kind of undermine it. If you don't practice, you won't be successful with the yoga. A primary element of the yoga is getting to the point, the yoga meaning the practice, is getting to the point where the mind doesn't run you. You don't have to be psychologically perfect. If you can manage mind and emotions, which takes just basic maturity, that's good enough. So it's not like you have to work out all your kinks. And God knows we all have a lot of kinks. So that's the good news. Also from this Feast or Famine book, I wanted to consider how do we begin to dig into the mud? And the answer I'm going to give is self-observation. There's a great book, which we always have on the book table, by a man that goes by the name Red Hawk, on self-observation, which is a great kind of primer, you know, and has wonderful information in it. So check that out if you're interested. But this book, Teaching on Mind and Emotions, also has a fair bit about self-observation and about this practice of self-observation. He says you start at the grossest and most basic level, and it applies in whatever you do. So you could just notice, what's your first thought when you look in the mirror in the morning? Or
coffee.
What's your first thought when something goes wrong? I found that pretty interesting to sometimes hear my self-talk, you know, when something hasn't gone the way I thought it was going to go. How do you drive? You know, what kind of reactions are you having when you're on the road? And this idea that actually someone else, another student, friend of mine, used this turn of phrase, and it's another one that once she shared it with me, I've never forgotten it. She talked about stalking the small dissonances. And we kind of touched on this a little bit before. So I would call those behaviors from our blind side that we're quick to justify or sweep under the rug, like it never happened, to keep our self-image intact. So this could be like, you know, you say something and your voice is just a little too loud and you wonder why that came out that way, you know, a little too loud, or your tone is aggressive. or you make a joke that's not really funny, like just little things that kind of just like, you can feel it, you can feel it in the space, whether you're with a group of people or it's one-on-one. And this friend of mine was sharing with me that she'd found it tremendously useful to kind of like not let those things go by too quickly and try to dig a little bit into the small dissonances. Like, what was that about? Like, why did that come out that way when I said that? Or why did I think that was a good idea to tell that joke? Whatever it was. So I've gotten a lot of mileage out of that. Let's see. So a couple of quotes on self-observation from this book, Teachings on Feast or Famine, Teachings on Mind and Emotion. Self-observation is to reveal your judgments and all the veils you use to cover yourself. It's to see yourself as you are. Change will happen. The work will take care of change. All you need to do is see yourself nakedly. Honestly. So, in the book out there by Red Hawk called Self-Observation, he has a section called like how to do it or something, how to do the practice, and he has four kind of conditions of the practice of self-observation, which I also love to sort of quiz myself on, when I think of it. And these are really radical. They're like they indicate that really doing a practice of self-observation is kind of out of the box of what we might first think of when we think of observing ourselves. Like, oh wow, what a jerk I am, and why did I do that? Because the first one is without judgment. So you're observing, and the condition is, if you're really doing self-observation, it's without judgment. And another friend of mine said, if it talks, you're not. If it's talking, you're not self-observing. Like if there's mind chatter, about what you're observing, then you're not actually doing the practice of self-observation. Obviously, it's not like you're going to just say, I'm going to do it and do it perfectly the first time. So without judgment, this is huge. I mean, we judge other people, but we judge ourselves, really, like maybe first and foremost. Without changing what is observed. So again, wow, this is like, there's like this primal impulse. See something that's not, not in line with how you think it should be, and I'm going to fix that. It's very automatic. I mean, for me as I usually share this at some point in every talk, because when I was a parent, I had a lot of mud to dig in, I did this. I was always judging and trying to change what I observed, and I just went at that for a long time until I finally just wore myself out. I clearly remember a time when I was just like, I just got to stop doing this. This is getting me nowhere. Like, just, it's like, it's making me discouraged. My kids don't like to see me doing that. And it's just overall not really helping the situation. So it's like, it's not like I was done with doing that, but I was done with doing that on some level, just once and for all, when I finally really saw that. And I was just like, this is not, this business of kind of beating myself up and actually I realized that it was a way to not really truly see, like I couldn't really truly see what was needed as long as I was engaged in this, this loop of like beating myself up about how I felt I was failing. And meanwhile, I was struggling like any parent might do. It was nothing. It was not what I was making it. I wasn't the worst of the worst, which is a kind of reverse egotism, I'm the worst there is, give me a prize. So without judgment, without changing what is observed, with relaxed attention on the body. So you're noticing, you're just noticing what's going on in the body. Like maybe you're, depending on the situation you're in, maybe your stomach is upset or your head hurts or, whatever. Just like noticing what's happening in the physical organism in response to the situation you're in is part of your observing. It's kind of noticing that piece with relaxed attention on the body. Is everybody familiar with this idea of self-observation? Is it? Yeah, okay, so it's not a foreign thing. Without judgment, without changing what is observed, with relaxed attention on the body. And then the last one, though, with ruthless self-honesty. This goes back to that inquiry, who am I kidding?
I mean, that sounds like the cornerstone of meditation. It's not about relaxing or finding, just sitting and observing the observer. That's my understanding.
What's the cornerstone? What?
Of the exact things you just listed.
These four things.
That's meditation. Sitting with, and watching. There's something about me that without judging, just watching it dispassionately and being rigorously honest while I breathe and watch my body. That's sitting.
Mm-hmm.
That's easy to understand and damn hard to do.
Mm-hmm. Yes, indeed. There are a lot of levels of self-observation. And again, from feast or famine. Start at the gross level, the way we are in relationship, our attachments in the domains of money, food, and sex. The mud. And then he suggests move on to observing the feelings and emotions associated with the actions. So it's like you dig down another level when you're able, beyond just noticing your actions. Then you notice the feelings and emotions associated. Then start to notice subtle connections and underlying motives. So it's kind of like peeling an onion, I mean, I think that, the resistance for me to self-observation is because, if we're going to use these words, and I'm using these words now, self-observation, I think it's because it's like, I have this idea that, what I'm going to find out is bad news, is going to be bad news, that I'm going to find out that I don't have basic goodness, which is something that Chogyam Trungpa talks about, that we all have basic goodness, Maybe it's having been raised in a milieu of original sin and, and like that, I don't know, but it's like, I'm always anticipating that, that's going to be bad news, but it isn't always. And even digging into the mud and uncovering what's in the shadow, it's not always bad news. So, that's helpful to remember and to kind of just, calm yourself down. You can do this. You're right. And, also that maybe things that we have repressed or that we've put into the shadow or we feel are unacceptable. I mean, the age we were at when we did that, we probably couldn't we couldn't integrate that stuff, at age 5, get whatever kind of situation and emotional environment we were living in. We just did the best we could. We're probably super creative, actually, the way that stuff gets handled, But as adults, we have, lots of more tools. And so, it's okay. We can let some of that stuff up. And it's, as I mentioned at the beginning, I think the idea of having help or guidance is really, really maybe irreplaceable if you want to engage in that process, of digging in the mud. Oh yeah, this is really great. So from A Feast or Famine, he poses the question, how do we commit to a practice of paying attention, or to any practice for that matter? He says you make a decision. He goes on to say, many of you at random times in your life have had the urge to lie or steal or worse, but you didn't do it. Not because you couldn't do it or because you didn't want to do it, but because you made a decision. Lying's not just, stealing's not just, that's all. And in spite of temptation, sometimes really strong temptation, when you could steal and know for sure you wouldn't get caught, still you don't do it anyway because you made a decision. It's exactly the same with spiritual practice. So this is kind of an example of what I was saying to you before about him starting with the mundane and taking it to the sublime. Like you can use that same, have you had that experience? I mean, I never, I don't relate so much to stealing and lying, but I think I do relate to the idea of having some sort of standard I'm not willing to bend. So that means that I've made a decision. And so I can use that same power around my spiritual practice. I can commit to a practice, for instance, of self-observation. I still have the song, but also we could just, I don't know, we could have some discussion if anybody has anything they want to say.
I guess I always chime in, so what the hell?
Yeah, go ahead and chime.
If I spend all my time meditating and observing and practicing and praying and reading, and I don't pay my bills, I'm in the sky, but the mud is being ignored.
Mm-hmm. Good point.
And I've heard the saying, he's got his head in the clouds, but his feet are planted on the ground. He's got it both ways.
Yes, thanks. Well said. Who else?
I tried so hard to be perfect when I was little. So, but then you get a little older and you accept that you're not. And you have tendencies that aren't so great and things about you that aren't so good. And you just kind of accept them because you've always heard about them, talked about them. And so it's kind of a backward way to appreciate a childhood negative thing. Is that kind of convoluted?
Yeah.
It is kind of convoluted, but some of our situations are kind of convoluted.
Yeah, I mean, probably would have been better if you'd been accepted unconditionally,
and appreciated and loved and all that stuff.
In the way that a child wants to be when you had been, but in the absence of that, sounds like you made the best of it.
Parts of things work out.
Yeah. With what I was saying before, that as an adult we have more skills and abilities around stuff
to deal with
than we
things.
did as a kid. Deal with things. Thank you.
I mean, it seems like the things that happen to us when we're children create the environment where, like, our shadow thrives. We cover up our hurts in different ways. Like maybe by being angry, or maybe by being adaptive, or maybe by, in a myriad number of ways. And I think that as we get older and, we mature more, we have the capacity to kind of see ourselves, and we don't, there's aspects of ourselves that we don't like so much. I mean, I'm speaking for myself, but I think that that's true of everybody. But to have some compassion for oneself, kind of a key. You have to work with those things. I mean, would you say that working with them just has to do with observing them, or is there more?
We observe. Is that enough?
Well, yeah, is that enough for
accepting?
What results from that? I wonder.
I mean, to me, it seems like when you observe things, like if I observe my impatience, or my fear, my insecurity, or something, I can trace that back to my family roots in some ways, but it just seems that way to me. Then I have to suffer that. I mean, to be with that, is to acknowledge that. I'd like to think of myself as being
top notch.
yeah. And then also, like you're saying, not beat yourself up about it.
Because I was thinking, is that where compassion comes in?
I think without self-compassion, we're kind of dead in the water.
Yeah. So then,
That's a good point, though, that we have to, if we're going to observe without judgment, then we will have to bear it. We have to bear what we see.
It seems to me like on the spiritual path, that's the transformative element. This alchemical kind of, process, whatever that is, that seems so mysterious, where you actually undergo some metamorphosis. It doesn't happen.
I like what you're saying, but I think it's like not such a big deal. I think it's like that the moment that you do that, you dig into the mud, you're in that position to be able to get to the sky right there, boom. And it's not like forever. It's not like, okay, done. It's a done deal. No more mud. It's like,
Right.
No.
That's right. In the very next moment, there might be some mud.
That's right. A work in progress.
That's the nature of the spiritual path, is that we've been invited into this. And that's, to me, that's the thing that we've been given. We've been given this opportunity to do this work. And the other thing I was thinking too is that, what is that specifically for me? What is my mud? And it's very specific. And the way I work with it is very particular. But if I do it in any kind of way that you've spoken about tonight, it brings a result. Like you said, and what is the result? Only you can know that. But it's also like you're saying, a work in progress. It's a work that you keep looking at, and you see what it is, because you know where you want to go. You know that you want that friend back. What's it worth to you to do this work? To suffer consciously is what I'm talking about.
And maybe you don't need to see the result. Maybe you just need to keep self-observing. That's the trick. If I continue to self-observe, I'm succeeding. The trick is to continue that. Where I observe myself in suffering is my lack of attention. And just a very simple is going to the grocery store and realizing that I left my billfold at home. Or going to the gym and realizing that I left my iPod at home. Goodness, that would be awful. Or maybe it could be putting my coffee cup, not putting my coffee cup under the Keurig coffee machine. And here comes the coffee out, and there's no cup there. It's just lack of attention. If I was on attention, none of this would happen. But it always happens in the most mundane activities of my life. If it's really, really important, like if it's life or death or something like that, I'm pretty good at paying attention to those kinds of things. But it's this ordinariness of my life, and I find it happening more than I would like, and I don't think I'm ready to be shipped off to some loony farm yet. That's the part.
You say the coffee isn't really that important to you.
Oh, it is important. But we were created this way, and I see my struggle as paying attention.
I think that the thing you're describing where when there's a lot at stake, you're right there with your attention, and then otherwise, it's not so good. I think that's pretty common. Mm-hmm. It's like when we don't think that it matters, then we go, whatever. No, I think it's definitely worth like inquiring into, digging into. Why is it that stuff doesn't? Why is it that I feel that I can just let that go? If in fact that's the dynamic.
There's this immediate thing that happens sometimes, like he was describing, where you dig into the mud and then you're in the sky. Yeah. Just because you're willing to dig into the mud. But I think there's also, the way Jung talks about alchemy, there's like substances to be obtained in the mud that you may. It's like one of those video games where there are things along the path that you're supposed to take. There's substances or materials, tools you're supposed to collect that you don't know what they're for yet. But sure enough, you're going to need it, when you run into some other ogre later on. So the ability to dig into the mud and recognize things that might be useful, whether you need them right now or not, I think there's value in that.
Like having patience for the process, it may not immediately complete or...
Yeah, because sometimes you dig into the mud and it's like you're looking at something and you can't bear it, or you don't know what to do with it, or but then sometimes it just clicks with something else at some other time.
Thanks.
About this lack of attention thing. But it seems like acceptance has to do with accepting those things too, and gently bring yourself back to the present. That's what it is.
I guess to the childhood element, my understanding was, I found this out myself the hard way, insight for me means nothing. Insight without processing it, with help, working through it, that's painful and, it's tough. But the A versus what A led to B in terms of how I turned out, etc., I get all of that, I believe, or most of it. And there, I'm sure, are blank spots. But without processing that and working through it, I found that just knowledge alone doesn't do it.
Yeah, I mean, Jung felt very strongly that it was a very real possibility that in exploring the shadow, that you could be overtaken by shadow material. Like there was some caution or danger about digging in there, so yeah.
Humor's good.
Yeah.
Humor's good in there.
Well, yeah, then again, the idea of like some kind of help and guidance, I have a couple more things, so maybe I'll do those and see if there's anything else to be said. Anybody else have a burning share, as they used to call it? Well, there's this other book by this teacher, French teacher, Arnaud Desjardins. This was a book that was it was his last book. He's passed away. Called Ever Present Peace. But he's speaking to the same. He's got a chapter in here called Staying in Love. He's really speaking to the same theme that we're talking on tonight, but kind of a slightly different angle, which I appreciated. There's the occurrence and there's the person. We may bear some person a grudge, not only his or her action. And when we bear someone a grudge, we are the first victim of our error. I'm not speaking in favor of the person you will forgive. I'm speaking in favor of your own peace of heart. There comes a time when your conviction may be so strong that you will not waste 1 second anymore on cursing this person and so harm yourself. If you want you now to be happy, you must renounce bearing anyone a grudge. And if you can reverse the situation, the antidote, as the Buddhists say, is to send loving thoughts to this person, to bless him or her. It's all for your benefit. Annoyances, deceptions are our daily bread. We put ourselves at the mercy of someone who acted wrongly with us, but at the end, it's we who are affected. But when will suffering end? It will end when you change. The world will go on running its course, but it will lose its power to disturb you. These affirmations really seem astonishing, but I cannot change a negative emotion towards someone into love for this person. Yes, you can. By changing some inner circuits while being inspired by Buddha or the Gospels or Swami Prajnanpad's work. That was an Indian man who was one of his teachers. And if one situation loses its power to upset you, the path is opened before you in order that someday no situation may disturb you interiorly anymore. I want to play you this song. So my teacher was a very prolific lyricist, also a poet. He wrote just reams of poetry, devotional poetry to the Indian man who was his teacher. There's big fat volumes of it, 4 or 5 of them. But he was a prolific lyric writer too, and in his body of students there was a number of musical projects that happened, and so the lyrics he wrote were composed to music, and there's something like over 500 published lyrics of his, and there were more that never were. So there's a song called Philosophize. I think this is a CD that has him singing on, so you'll hear his voice. Anyway, this song is called Philosophize, and the refrain of the song is dig into the mud to get to the sky. So I wanted to play that for you, but I'm going to read you the words first, in case you can't pick them up on here. Love is the answer to questions unasked. Kindness the gesture to loosen the mask. Do unto others what would be done to you. The credo of service to get us all through. And then here's the kind of chorus. Life can be easy, life can be tough. Yeah, we have choices, but is it enough? To speak in fine phrases to philosophize. Dig into the mud to get to the skies. And verse 2. Anger's the poison that always destroys. Violence, aggression, just games for small boys. But games can get deadly, as we all have seen. the heartbroken remnants of goodness gone mean. And then that refrain again, life can be easy, life can be tough. Yeah, we have choices, but is it enough? To speak in fine phrases, to philosophize, dig into the mud to get to the skies. And then one more verse. Love is the answer when hate asks us why. We feel so helpless as years pass us by. Do unto others the best that you can, with gentle affection and 2 helping hands. Life can be easy, life can be tough. Yeah, we have choices, but is it enough? To speak in fine phrases, to philosophize, dig into the mud to get to the skies. Good, huh? All right.
To get to the skies. Anger is the poison that always destroys. Violence, aggression, just games for small boys. But things can get deadly, as we have all seen. The heartbroken remnants of goodness call me. Life can be easy, life can be tough. Yeah, we have choices, but is it enough? To speak in fine phrases, to philosophize. Dig into the mud to get to the skies. To get to the skies.